any class I've ever taught. I've never done this before. For this class, I wrote a preface, and I'll walk you through a little bit of why that preface is there. Here's the reality. This is something probably very different than any of us have ever done in a Bible study. You might think of this more of a study in sociology even than the Bible. But the point is, we're going to look at what the Bible says about each of these items. So that's where we're going to be. Now, let me give you an overview of the materials. First of all, if you start in your packet, you're going to see that there is an outline. We've got 3 sections that we're going to deal with. The first is just kind of setting the stage, because we need to know how we got here. The second is really the meat of the study, and we're going to look at 8 different subjects related to culture today. The third are the class notes, the third section, and that's going to be pages 1 through 11. That just takes the outline and expands on it so that you can follow. And in most cases, I think I've been able to put the biblical citations in. There's also some room for notes if you want to take notes. And if you'll notice on several of them, they're footnoted. And with those footnotes are the sources that were used for whatever I was looking at that particular time. That brings us to the next section in your handout, which is the bibliography. If you look at the bibliography, there's six main books we're going to spend some time with. Bodie Bachman's Fault Lines, Joe Dallas's Christian and a Cancel Culture. I got to tell you, I didn't know who Joe Dallas was, and at first I thought, sounds like a furniture salesman or something. Turns out that he's got a master's in Christian counseling, and at one point was a member of the American Association of Christian Counselors. So he's got quite a bit to say that I think you'll find interesting. David Jeremiah, where do we go from here? Most of you have heard before, and we'll look at some more at that. We Will Not Be Silenced. Erwin Lutzer is another one of those. He was pastor at Moody Bible Church for 36 years. We Will Not Be Silenced is his book. So far, all of these are what I would call resources with a Christian bent. And then we're going to get to this one called Erasing America. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of James Robin, but this is actually, I would almost make this a secular book, in that he is a historian. He's got a PhD, I think, in history and maybe in economics. I don't recall for sure. This is more of a secular look when he cites many of the same things that some of the Christian writers do. And then finally, one will be in today by Albert Mohler. Albert Mohler, he's president, I think he's still president, of Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. Don't remember, PhD probably from Dallas Theological, but don't quote me on that because I don't remember. And his book is called The Gathering Storm. So those are the resources we're going to be looking at. But if you look at the bibliography, you're going to find about 3 pages worth of electronic citations. And I've grouped them according to which area we're dealing with. For instance, anything that you want to look up in let's say, critical race theory is going to be grouped under critical race theory. These aren't going to help you much unless you had them electronically and just could click on them. So I will send them electronically, and you should be able to click on it, and I'd encourage you to go look through any and all of them when I send it. And then finally, the last part of the book are all the PowerPoints that we're going to be dealing with. So that's everything, and I think there's 24 of them. I did want to point out 2 things on this first slide, and the first one is this, and this is going to be the theme for everything we talk about, and I've mentioned it before. You cannot look at the Bible through the lens of culture. You have to look at culture through the lens of the Bible. Culture changes. In fact, if I were to, most of you know that I spent my junior high and high school career growing up on the Navajo reservation. The Navajo culture is very different than our culture today. So which culture do you choose, and at what point in history do you choose that culture? So it's impossible to use the culture to look through the lens of culture at the Bible. Unfortunately, that's exactly what many of our churches do today. They say that the culture should give us our view of the Bible. So the first thing I want to point out is that's if there's any motto for this class, it's going to be that you cannot look at the Bible through the lens of culture. You have to look at culture through the lens of the Bible. The second thing I wanted to point out is you'll notice on this first slide, I gave a citation from 1 Peter. 1 Peter 3:15 and 16. But in your hearts receive Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience, so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. That first part of this, always be prepared to give an answer, that's what all these classes should be about. None of these classes should be, well, now I know everything there is to know about the subject. Every one of these classes should be, man, now I've got a hunger to know more about these because I want to know how it affects my walk, and how is it I talk to somebody else of a different thought. So with all those, as kind of preamble, let me go back to this preface I was talking about, and I'd like you to read it at some point. I'm not going to read through it, but I'm going to hit the highlights. And as I pointed out, and I can tell you 27, 28, maybe 28 years of teaching, I've never written a foreword to a lesson. As I said, this is a very different lesson. So I wanted to point out 4 things. First of all, everyone comes to everything in life with preconceptions and with a worldview. None of us are different. My worldview is unapologetically evangelical, fundamentalist, and Christian. And this will surprise some of you, but it's also somewhat conservative. Now, what I've tried to do here is clearly and impartially render what is being said in culture and what's being said in the Bible, but recognize that I have a bias just like everyone else. The second thing is, in addition to the volumes of written material, if you just do an internet search of any one of these subjects, take one subject, you're going to get thousands, if not millions, of entries on that one subject. So as such, be aware that all we're going to do in this coming weeks is just barely touch the tip of the iceberg. So additionally, the last sentence in this is, additional research and study by participants is encouraged and expected. In other words, don't take this as the final word. Go look for yourself. Do what the Bereans said. They went and researched everything that Paul said to them.
We're going to have a final exam.
Pardon me?
We're going to have a final exam.
Yes, you are.
Just 2. Apparently there's going to be extra credit.
We should do it just for the fun of it.
Thirdly, if you look at the bibliography and electronic resources, you'll see a number of resources, and they run the gamut. I can tell you that there are some conservative sites, there are some very liberal sites, and there's probably everything in between. So I've tried to do this as level-handedly as I can, given my preconceptions, but I want to make sure you understand that any mistakes in grammar, interpretation, logic, or application are mine. The Holy Spirit does not make mistakes. I do. So approach this knowing that that's what's happening. And then finally, as I said, there's only one principle to be retained, and that's what I just said. You can't view the Bible through the lens of culture. So that's all preamble. Why don't we get started with, before we do that, anybody have questions, comments, issues?
I'm not listening.
By the way, I should point out, this is going to be one of those classes that we pretty much have to allow we do have to have participation, because on any one of these subjects, there's probably several things that you have thoughts about or interest about. So I will try to keep it, sometimes it's like herding cats in this room. I will try to keep us headed in the right direction, but if you got something you want to opine on or something you want to say, be clear and concise and just let me know. You'll have to be loud enough for this mic to pick you up. If not that, tell Bob and let him do it. Is that fair, Bob?
That is fair.
Okay. All right. Let's start then with setting the stage. And you're going to say, well, why are we going all the way back here? Modernism versus postmodernism. If you look at the outline or even at your notes, you'll see that I've titled this The Tumultuous 19th Century. And it has to do with the rise of three things, all of which happened in the 19th century, most of them in the mid-19th century. So call it, even the 1850s on through 1900. Modernism is the first thing we're going to talk about. And you'll notice I've juxtaposed a couple of things here. I've juxtaposed modernism and postmodernism. There's a reason for doing that, but I want to focus on modernism because that's what happened first. And modernism was kind of a late 19th century philosophy. And you'll find a lot of philosophy comes out of Germany. It has its basis in German writers. And the point was that they postulated the world has changed since the founding of Christianity, and as a result, must change to reflect modern times. That's where the term modern comes from, or modernism. You'll find it in art, you'll find it in sociology, you'll find it in the church. It basically rejected everything historical up to that point and the authority of anything historical. Obviously, what does that mean? Up until about the mid-19th century again, the Bible was considered the authority in almost anything related to morality and social norms. Modernity, or modernism, rejected that. And it said that universal truths can be discovered by rational thought and discovery. So if you had to pick a word for modernism, it would be everything had to be rational, logical, worked out. How do you logically work out the Bible? So that was the main precept behind modernism, and it stressed objectivity. It said there's a single correct view that can be discovered with logic, discovery of facts, and balanced analysis. So it was a very analytical period. I put postmodernism up there for a purpose, and postmodernism was almost the complete antithesis of what modernism was. By the end of World War II, people had begun to reject modernism and said, okay, wait a minute, that's not right. So let me just hit two more items on modernism, and then we're going to go to postmodernism for just a second. As I said, it's based on using rational logical means to gain knowledge, and the modernist approach was objective, theoretical, and analytical. So if you put the modernist in the box of if I can't prove this, it can't be true, you're going to have to put the postmodernist in exactly the opposite box. And the postmodernist said that denied the application of logical thinking and said that the approach was based on subjectivity. Now, let me tell you what the problem with that is, or what finally developed from postmodernism. That's today's theory of, well, dude, my truth says. So pretty much everything that was provable, postmodernism said, no, it all has to do with feelings. It doesn't have to do with whether it can be proved or not. It has to do with my feelings. Well, postmodernism, by that definition, meant that everybody's view of life was completely different, and whatever their view of life was the right view of life. Now, I have to tell you that, although I haven't been able to find anybody yet that can define it, the next period that most people are going to talk about is meta-modernism. That will be after postmodernism. I'd like to give you a definition on it. I can't, because nobody else can either. You get a lot of different definitions, and typically what's going to happen is this is going to coalesce over a period of time. So the first issue that we had in the 19th century was modernism. You can see why that would be an issue in terms of challenges to the Bible. The second thing that happened, and all these were almost coincidental, all of these happened almost at the same time. The second thing was Darwinism. And we've talked about that before in some of our other classes. Here's a summary of Darwin's belief, but let me just hit a couple of items. Darwin, in his book on the origin of the species in 1859, made several points. He said, first of all, evolution was descent with modifications. Secondly, that the mechanism to accomplish that, the modifications were attained by natural selection. Because resources are limited, organisms with heritable traits favor survival. Those without those traits don't survive. You've heard the concept survival of the fittest? That's where it comes from. So Darwin was saying that all of us evolved from this pool of slime, and the creatures that continued to prosper were those who somehow changed their livelihoods in order to be able to survive. So survival of the fittest. The third item was adaptation. Natural selection causes populations to adapt to become well-suited over time. Now, on the slide, I want to point out two things. The first is this, number 3. Since more organisms are produced and can survive, they compete for limited resources. That, by definition, is survival of the fittest. Darwin's theory is if you don't adapt to whatever's going on in your environment, you're going to die. His second major point was in just below point 5, you'll see it says this process of natural selection causes species to change over time. What this doesn't tell you is that it requires lots and lots and lots of time for those things to change. That's why most evolutionists will tell you, without a lot of backing, that it's been millions and millions and millions of years that these have occurred. So now you can understand a little bit about why Darwinism would have been included in the 3. The first was modernism said only logic. The second, Darwinism said, well, we all evolved. What does that do for Genesis and the story of creation? It says that's a bunch of bunk, doesn't it? Now let me give you the third, and probably what I would consider the most egregious in terms of the effect it had on the church. Let me hit 2 more pieces of oh no.
Going back to the modernism, you said it started in the middle of the 18th century?
Yes.
Or 19th century?
Right.
Well, I just looked up the Industrial Revolution. That was 1760 to 1840. Rapid population growth, people leaving the farms, moving to the cities.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I think that's a good precursor, Lynn. I think that's a good point to why modernism developed. What's happening? With the Industrial Revolution, what's going on? No longer are people farming, now they're relying on machines, they're relying on the industrial age, they're relying on other things that are tangible, that they can say, I can see how this created that. So modernism was a pretty logical follow-up, when you think about it, to that period of time.
Yeah.
I think it's a good point, Lynn. Now, biblical criticism. Actually, it goes back to 1822, but it really could be traced more likely to about 1878. And you'll see a couple of definitions here. First of all, what is lower criticism? I don't know whoever came up with the term higher criticism. To me, it's kind of an anomaly, but let me tell you how they differentiate it. Lower criticism are questions having to do with preservation and transmission of biblical text, including information on the writer, on which manuscripts, on which is the most reliable form, etc. A lot of the stuff that we've done in biblical interpretation. It's taking the Bible and finding who the writer was, what was the best manuscript, what was the best text. But it always assumed the Bible was accurate. Higher criticism, on the other hand, is a literary analysis dealing with authorship, date, and literary composition from a very technical standpoint. Developed in the 19th century, generally takes a secular approach, asking questions regarding the origin and composition of the text. I want to stress that, a secular approach. Now, the principles of higher criticism are based on, I'm going to give you a couple of them, are based on reason rather than revelation, and are also speculative by nature. We're going to talk about one of the main proponents in something called higher criticism, but I want you to notice this particular slide. By the way, let me make sure you understand, most of these slides you can find on the internet. Some of them have a bias. This one just might. Look at item number 2. The leaders, mostly German, have been so preoccupied with theories that they seem to lack any common sense. Well, that sounds like a pretty easy, straightforward assumption, doesn't it? The other items, though, are important, and that is, this is true of all of them. The leaders of higher criticism movement base their theories largely on their own prior subjective conclusions. So the first part is true that they were subjective conclusions, but the most important part was this. Look at item 3. The dominant men of higher criticism movement have a very strong bias against the supernatural. They said miracles could not occur. It was impossible. Why? Do you remember when we just got through talking about modernism? If it couldn't be proven, it couldn't have happened. They said that prophecy can't occur. Why? Same reason. Prophecy is a supernatural event. So anything that was related to the supernatural, the higher critics would have said, that's impossible. And then finally, the Bible is not and could not be divinely inspired or revealed. It is an entity, an entirely human document with human origins and human problems. Now, what's the sum of all of these three things? Well, the sum is this. As I said, prior to, call it the mid-1800s, the Bible was taken as the authority on most of what happened in morality, what happened in the way we treated people. Beginning in the 1800s, the conjunction of these three items put the Bible in deep question by everyone. That's the time that you'll find some of our more liberal congregations in this country, in fact throughout the world, more liberal congregations began to question the Bible. And the first time you question the Bible in terms of, well, if this isn't true, then you got to say none of it's true. That's why you'll see a number of churches dealing with issues today. The Methodist Church dealing with sexuality. You'll see the Episcopalian Church dealing with issues. Presbyterian Church dealing with issues. All of those come from this period of time, or the genesis of it was this period of time when the authority, the Bible, became questioned. And it was based primarily on these three things. Modernism, Darwinism, and higher criticism. Let me point out one other thing. Julius Wellhausen is probably the what most people. If you said to somebody higher criticism, there's a number of names that would pop up. His would come to the very top in most cases. He developed a theory called the documentary hypothesis, and the documentary hypothesis said, nope, Moses didn't write the Pentateuch or the Torah. That was written hundreds, if not 1,000 years later by other people going back and making this stuff up. And the documentary hypothesis said that there were 4 authors, the Yahwists, the Elohists, the Deuteronomists, and the Priestly. And they were over some period of time. I want you to notice on the right-hand side, as you face it, of this particular slide, his key presuppositions. First of all, Scripture must submit itself to human reason and contemporary methods of study and models of thought. Isn't that what modernism was? Yeah. Secondly, Scripture has errors. Thirdly, humans are the only authors of Scripture. If you start with those presuppositions, you are automatically excluding the Bible. Does that make sense? So the summary, again, to all of these things was exactly that by about the mid-19th century, you begin to see this chink in the armor. Well, why is that important to us? Because that's where, ultimately, we're going to end up today when we get to this study. If you begin questioning this and begin questioning this, I'm not saying you shouldn't question things. Again, the Bereans questioned everything that Paul said. They said, we're going to go check on them. Question everything. But you make sure that when you question it, you're getting both sides of the story, and then you can choose. Let's see. I think.
He's kind of a mean-looking old German.
Pardon me?
He's a mean-looking old German.
Aren't they all?
I was gonna say, that's,
Now then, the next big step I want to cover in kind of setting the stage is the advent of mass communication. Now, if you go to, you should be, I don't know, you're probably on page 6, or not page 6. In not in the slides, in your handout, I forget what page you're on, but if you look at your handout, you can take notes there if you want. I want to look at this kind of, what I'm calling the media blitz from radio to TikTok, and I want to make a few points. First of all, you'll notice I've given you some citations where this information came from. I put together this table. If there are errors and dates, they're going to be off a little bit here or there. But for the most part, Len, did you find one?
Yeah, internet, doesn't say Al Gore.
Well, interestingly enough, here in my notes, I was going to point this out. Sir Tim Berners-Lee invented the internet in 1991, and I have right here with Al Gore.
Good.
So, obviously, for those of you who believe Al Gore invented the internet, by the way, email goes back to the 1940s. Email was used by the military in the 1940s. It's not until 1991 that we get what I'd call the true internet, the World Wide Web. But we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, because I want to point this out. There was virtually, the communication that took place in our society prior to 1920 was newspapers. Newspapers or word of mouth. I do have to tell you that my dad used to say about my mother, he would say, if you want to spread the news, telegraph, telephone, tell Barbara. So, both of them have left us, so I'm okay saying that today. But communication was either person to person, or by letter, or by print. Those were the only real communications. And as a practical matter, most of the print was localized. You began to have a national press somewhat later, but it's not until 1920 that you began to get radio. And the first licensed commercial broadcast was on KDKA in 1920. Again, you'll find probably some varying dates if you go check it, but they're all going to be around this period of time. Not long after that, I want you to notice what happens. Television, 1926. NBC, which was the first major television network, broadcast in New York and Washington to about 1,000, and they had about 1,000 viewers by 1939. So television came about in 1926. Relatively close period of time, don't you think? 1920, 1926. We already have television broadcasts. By the way, I remember our first television, and that means it was after 1952. So even then, it was not a medium that a lot of people knew of or had. I want you to notice now the gap. Look at the gap between television and the internet. 70 years. That the predominant media was television, and still to some degree radio. But then in 1991, and as Lynn has already pointed out, Al Gore invented the internet. Please, for those of you at home, realize this is all tongue-in-cheek. A guy by the name of Sir Tim Berners-Lee invented it. And CERN is actually it's a European scientific agency. I don't remember what the letters stand for, but it was a European group. He made it royalty-free in 1993. That's the time you could probably say the internet or the World Wide Web began. Then I want you to notice the next thing. The first internet-capable mobile phone was the Nokia 9000 communicator. In 1996. Remember how I said there was a big gap between 1926 and 1991? I want you to look how rapid things happen after that. 1996, mobile phone. 1997, the first social media website is born. It was called 6 Degrees. It's no longer in business. It was in business till about 2000. The reason it's called 6 Degrees, by the way, is the theory. Has anybody ever heard the theory of the 6 degrees of separation? What that meant was the world had gotten so small in terms of travel and being able to communicate and things like that. The world had gotten so small that the theory was if you were to walk into any room of a number of people, eventually, out of 6 people, 2 of those 6 would establish some kind of connection. As an example, let's say you were at a barbecue and you said, "Where are you from?" "Well, I'm from Biloxi, Mississippi." "No kidding, my Uncle Ned lives in Biloxi, Mississippi." "What street do you live on?" 22nd Street. "No kidding, my Uncle Ned lives on 20." That was the point behind 6 degrees of separation, was that in this room, eventually out of 6 people, 2 of them are going to establish some kind of connection. And the point was, that's how small the world has gotten. That's why the first well, I don't know if that's why they did it, but that's why they named it the 6 Degrees, which was the first social media website. Now stay on the right side of the slide for a minute with me, and I want you to notice this. LinkedIn, December 2002. Facebook, February 2004. YouTube, February 2005. Twitter, March 2006. Do you notice an explosion here? I mean a huge explosion of social media platforms. The last one I was able to find, I don't know if there's any since then, the last one I was able to find was TikTok, which came about in 2017. So in a period of 15 years, you had this huge explosion, the huge media explosion in what I'm going to call social media. Now, why is that important? Well, we're going to look at that here in just a second, but before we do that, go to the left side of the slide, and I want you to notice something. 70% of Americans today use a social media site. That means 246 million Americans out of the 300 and whatever it is use some type of social media. 4.9 of the 8.1 million people globally use some kind of social media. That's half of the world is using social media. And then finally, I want you to notice this. 40,000, the last bullet point there, U.S. influencers with 2 million plus followers exist today. Well, what in the world is a media influencer? Well, let me give you an idea. The reason these are important, by the way, is to a lot of degree, these are the ones shaping what's happening in our society today. Let me tell you who media influencers are. I am not one of them. They are people who've built a reputation for their knowledge and expertise in a specific topic. That's fine. Here's the problem. Because they have this influence, they also extend their influence to other areas where they don't have expertise. Let me give you an example here. All of these make regular posts about their topic or a preferred social topic on social media. All of these would be considered social media. And if you go click on any one of these, you know what you're going to find? You're going to find all their little icons down on their site saying go click on Twitter, go click on Facebook. You'll find me on each one of these. So they're in all of these platforms. Let me ask you this. Who in this room, just by a show of hands, knows who Cristiano Ronaldo is? Soccer fans?
No, he's pretty famous. He's a soccer player.
Soccer player. Yeah. Manchester.
He's a soccer player, right?
Yep.
He is he has the number 1 social media influencer in the United States. He has 517 million followers. He quit school after the 6th grade. He has $1 billion in career earnings. I don't know anything about the guy, but I did find a real positive for him. He's named after Ronald Reagan.
Really?
Yeah.
He is Portuguese too.
So that's the number 1 media influencer in the United States, probably in the world. 517 million viewers follow Ronaldo.
Is that stat is that 517 just in America?
I think it's worldwide.
I bet most of those are not in America because
Who follows soccer?
Yeah,
Yep.
Europeans love soccer. South America loves, Central America likes soccer. So
He's Portuguese, yes.
Yeah,
I think it's worldwide.
it's gotta be.
Now, let me give you,
117, our population's only about 350.
yeah, good point.
I mean,
That's right.
people have multiple accounts sometimes.
Yeah. So, you're right, it's almost got to be worldwide. Still, it's a pretty good sized number.
Yeah.
Let me give you some of the others. You know who the number 2 is?
Kardashians.
She's getting close. Justin Bieber.
What?
You're not a believer?
Does he even make music anymore? What's he?
I didn't know he made music to begin with. But,
Hey, sorry, you be careful around the summer with that. So.
yeah.
You know, he is supposedly he's a self-professing Christian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say, my daughter's a big Justin Bieber fan, so I am stuck listening to Justin Bieber Christmas music every year quite a bit. He does, like his more recent stuff has been Christmas albums and stuff.
Let me give you a couple of others, and then I encourage you to go look at each one of these. The point behind this is Justin Bieber has 455 million followers. These are the people that are influencing social media today. Let me give you another one. Number 5, Taylor Swift, 361 million. And Dave, finally we're going to get to your girlfriend, Kim Kardashian. Kim Kardashian is number 10 at 319 million.
You mentioned these people having expertise. That person does not have expertise in anything except in marketing.
Fashion.
Yet she's got 319 million followers that hang on her word.
Wow.
Now, let me ask you who you think is the number 1 top political influencer in the world.
I would say Trump's.
I'd say Trump.
Probably.
Rachel Maddow.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my God.
For those of you who don't know who Rachel Maddow is, she was an opinion columnist, I guess you call them, on MSNBC. She has 10.6 million followers. Now the question is, well, so what?
What does it all got to do?
What does this all have to do with it, right? Well, let's go to the next slide. How do people stay informed today? Well, this tells you. How do people stay informed today? What do all these social sites, by the way, I'm sure there's some very good ones. What do all of these have to do with the way society's developing today? Go to this next slide, where people get their news. Different generations consume news in different ways. If you'll notice on the left-hand side, people that get it from social media, and the right-hand side, people that get it from network and cable news. Look down at the bottom, and I've typed in what the different definitions of each of those groups are. Baby boomers, 1946 to 1964. Gen Z, 1997 to 2012. There's almost a bell curve here. Did you notice that? Going from the far left, from social media, 50% of Gen Z get their news from social media. On the far right, 58% of baby boomers, most of us in this room, with the exception of Eileen and Lynn and Deidre, the rest of us, get our news from network or cable news. Now, let me point out, network and cable TV news are equally slanted as social media, but there's some control over them. There's control by the FCC, there's control by others. So the point to all of this is, if you begin to look at where people consume news or where people follow, you get a pretty good indicator of what's happening and why society is changing and who's driving society. That's going to bring us to the next topic here. What's driving, or who is driving the culture? Jeff?
So, to your previous point, it also explains why the moves are so fast.
Right.
Why is it changing so fast? Because there's a huge difference in the speed of transmission from the far right to the left.
Correct.
Not only is there a huge, I agree with that, a huge difference in the speed of transmission, there's also a huge, wide-ranging amount of information and subjects, and anywhere across the spectrum. By the way, when I talk about culture, you have to understand there's really no good definition of culture. You can take everything from the left, and you can take everything from the right, and everything in between. So culture is kind of an amorphous name. So I should probably point out more what's happening that seemed to be out of what we would consider, what the Christian would consider a cultural norm. That's probably a better way of saying this. Now,
Hey, Tom, real quick, those percentages add up for each group in the 60s, 66, 62. Does that mean 34% of those groups don't get news? Or
They're
is it
reading
another source?
newspapers.
or probably in a different news or don't get it at all.
Very literate.
What's this doing to your newspaper?
You know, I mean, I've seen these sort of polls forever. Newspapers look like the network. Cable TV news, not as steep. Newspapers have kind of held a little bit, but
The biggest issue probably facing newspapers today are extinction. I would say, wouldn't you, Bob?
yeah, a quarter of them have gone extinct in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Printing costs, I mean, there's, what Tom just said, sorry, sidetrack, but what you just said about the wealth of news came from electronic, that was the thing about newspapers. It's a finite amount because it's on paper. It's, whether we had the 24-hour day radio news networks, TV news networks, that 24/7 news cycle that then social media stepped into and really blew up. But yeah, I don't know if there's a limiting factor on news. Once newspapers are gone, it is just going to be everybody is their own news. Sort of like everybody has their own truth. Everybody with social media now, everybody can be their own news source.
The one big difference between all of these, newspapers, radio, television, all have some type of regulation. At this point, there is no regulation on the internet. And I don't know if there should be. As far as I'm concerned, the regulation should be the user being smart enough to say, this guy's an idiot.
Probably out at the door.
Lynn?
What comes after Gen Z?
Interestingly enough, there is one that comes after Gen Z. Nobody can define it yet, but it's called Generation Alpha.
Really?
Yep, and that's basically from 2012 through at least 2027, and they're beginning, because they're all babies, there's no way to really identify what it is yet. Interestingly enough, it's also called Generation C. You know why?
C is in.
C as in COVID. The COVID generation. So Lynn, we probably have yet to even see what that generation is going to look like, because if you think about it, none of them, they're 10 years old. And you also get some controversy. You'll get some controversy on some of these just in terms of ages, but this is pretty close. Now, let's go to what's driving culture. And I'm going to finish up there probably today. Well, maybe.
Just a quick question on cable TV's gone away. Streaming is, I'm assuming streaming would be on that bright side too.
Probably.
Because cable TV networks are going away.
I was looking, Ernie, to see, well, all I can tell you is the source is Digital Media Trends 15th edition. So if you wanted to go see when it was developed, you could probably get a better idea. Now, so what's driving it? As Jeff pointed out, it's moving really fast, right? What's driving it? I'm going to use our first book, The Gathering Storm, by Albert Mohler. And I'm going to tell you what he says about it. First of all, he says, in one sense, just about everyone contributes something to the direction of the culture, which is a true statement, starting in the home and then extending outward to civic involvement and engagement with other people. We are culture-making cultures, building a playground as a cultural producing act. Now here's the part I want you to listen to. At the same time, given the immense size and scope of our culture, the main drivers of cultural production are the crafters of cultural messaging, and the drivers of the culture are powerful indeed. They produce the entertainment we watch, the media coverage we see, the clothes we wear, the technologies we use, and the education that shapes the minds of young people. And he says there are 4 drivers. I'm going to give you those 4 drivers. And by the way, if you want to skip Tuesday, we're going to do this Tuesday morning in Masters Men, because I think it's important to know what's driving the culture. So he says, in more recent decades, see Keith,
I got a dental appointment.
be better about when you make your appointments in the future.
I booked a dental appointment before this.
I bet you did.
So there.
In more recent decades, and especially over the last few years, these engines of cultural production have become more openly political, and the messaging has been more straightforwardly moral. And in both respects, the main centers of cultural production are pushing hard in a more liberal direction. Our society is not drifting leftward, it is being driven leftward. Our responsibility is to think clearly, carefully, and critically about how our culture is being influenced and what this means for Christians seeking to live faithfully in a secular age. So who are the 4 drivers? Well, you probably get a number of opinions on that too, but here they are according to Moeller. Hollywood, Wall Street, Silicon Valley, and academia. My way of thinking is academia is the most critical of those, so I'm going to end with that and go back to look at some pieces of the others. First of all,
So Tom, I understand 3 of them, I don't understand Wall Street.
we'll get there.
Okay.
And I thought so too. I'm going, why Wall Street? Well, you'll see here in just a minute. I can do it with one word. Well, 2 words. Bud Light. Think about that for a minute. We'll come back to it. Let's deal with Hollywood first. And let me tell you what Moeller says about Hollywood. The cultural products we watch and read and listen to are sending moral messages. Constantly. Hollywood controls the narrative. And if you can manipulate the narrative, you govern the mentality, worldview, and character of culture. And he goes on to say, the power of Hollywood rests in this troubling trend. Celebrities have a strong grip on the American conversation. They have the social capital that allows them to influence others. And they are driven by celebrity culture that now requires them to signal their moral precepts and politics constantly. These celebrities usually have no expertise nor experience in the complex issues in which they speak. Driven largely by the political left, the American cinematic experience has evolved into a highly political event which attempts to persuade through artistic expression and reveals a very clear moral and political agenda. More importantly, he goes on to say that they influence culture. And then he says this, these storylines, he's talking about the different storylines we see. By the way, I don't know if you've noticed, but tune into pretty much any television station and tell me that if in an hour's period of time you don't see at least 2 or 3 LGBT type commercials, or watch Jeopardy, or watch Wheel of Fortune. You can't make me believe that that's just coincidence. That's got to be driven somewhere. And that's the point that he's making. And then he goes on and says this, the storylines powerfully stream across the screen, attempting to move from the eyes of the audience into their hearts. No movie, television show, or song is morally neutral. With artistic sophistication, Hollywood dispenses its agenda around the world, and it's a message that we pay for. So according to Moeller, and I can't disagree with him, the first driver is Hollywood. By the way, the next time you see a Hollywood star come on and say, well, I don't know, you pick whatever one of these topics you want to and make a point about it, go look at the background of who that is. You're going to find a lot of them have high school educations. Few of them have extended educations. Most of them have no business commenting on the roles that they're commenting on. It's like me saying to my 15-year-old son, what do you think about nuclear holocaust? What does he know about nuclear holocaust? He will at some point, or maybe I should pick my 10-year-old son because my 15-year-old son probably does. So the first driver, according to Moeller, is Hollywood. The second one is Wall Street. Now, Jeff, here's where we're going to deal with your question. In a Harvard Business Review, by the way, the Harvard Business Review is kind of considered the standard in the business world. If you're a CEO, you probably read the Harvard Business Review. There's an article in the Harvard Business Review about businesses becoming more vocal in LGBTQ support. The article is written by a woman named Jessica Shortall. I want to come back to her in just a minute. And she makes 3 points. First of all, they're doing so because of pressure. Secondly, they are getting stronger in advocacy. And thirdly, inadvertently, she makes this point, there's no controversy, which is something we should be concerned about. And fourthly, this is a point I'm going to make, it's an echo chamber. Who's listening to the media? Wall Street. Who's listening to academia? Wall Street. What's Hollywood doing? They're influencing Wall Street. Guess who funds movies? Wall Street. It's a vicious cycle, in my estimation, an echo chamber of people talking to each other.
So maybe it's the term Wall Street that got me, because you're really talking about corporate culture. Corporate. Yep. Right. Okay.
I'll buy that. Yeah, I'll buy that. I'm just using Moeller's. I'm using what Moeller calls it now, but I would not disagree that yes, it's culture. I mean, the corporate culture. I would buy that. So he says the Harvard Business Review enjoys a revered status as a major mainstream publication that traces economic shifts that have reshaped American corporate life. This woman writes an article, and the title of the article is "Why Many Businesses Are Becoming More Vocal in Support of LGBTQ Rights." This is an article written by this woman. And he makes these points. The first is this, pressure. Here's what the article says. For some time, many American corporations have added their own social capital to the moral revolution, often fueling the agenda of the revolutionaries. Yet many of these businesses joined forces with the LGBTQ movement only after they sensed enough popular support, or as this article makes clear, enough popular pressure. I said a few minutes ago, Bud Light. Why do you think Bud Light did what they did? They thought the social pressure was demanding it. The problem is, the first thing you learn about marketing is know who you're selling your product to.
And you know what the population of the LGBTQ population is in the United States?
I do, and we're going to get there in a minute.
7.1.
Pardon?
7.1 supposedly.
I can't hear you, Ernie.
7.1.
Oh, could be the information I have says 5.3. The reality is, if you even took the outside number, it's a minuscule number compared to 300 million. Now, let me finish here with. I want to get these four finished because I think they're important. First of all, he says it's pressure. Corporate America's desire to build its brand has moved many companies to engage in virtue signaling, a show of support through advertisement or company policies that tilt its hat toward the LGBTQ. Sorry if I keep missing some of the letters here. They seem to change. And then, but you understand where I'm headed with this. Then he goes on to make this point. He says this, and this is the article. This is Jessica Shortall's article. And here's what she says. In recent years, however, something has shifted. More companies are speaking up on public policy impacting the LGBT community, and many are doing so in places where they face stiff headwinds, putting their brands and political relationships on the line. A pointed action in the climate where legal and political debates continue over whether business can refuse to serve LGBTQ people. What we are told that the reason for these directions in corporate America stem from Rapid opinion shifts. Jeff, that kind of speaks to your question about how fast things are moving.
Tom, you may have said, when was that written? When was that book written?
This book, 2002. I'm 2022. So relatively recent. Oh, I'm sorry, 2020. Still relatively recent. Most of these are, about the same. The most recent one, 2022, I think. So relatively recent. I can't tell you when the article in the Harvard Business Journal occurred. But let me finish one other item here. Let me find it. In the article, Shortall ends it this way. The work of equality requires many voices, and the emergence of the business community as a major force for LGBTQ rights has changed the conversation. Business leaders and the coalitions that convene them will have a game-changing role to play in 2019 and beyond. So the article had to be written around 2018. In the U.S. and around the world. Business competitiveness, the economic strength of their operating environments, and their commitment to inclusion and diversity demand that they stay the course. I want you to notice something here. And Bob can probably fill us in pretty good on what the term advocacy journalism means. Advocacy journalism means I'm no longer telling you the story, I'm telling you the way I want you to think. I want you to listen to this last sentence again. Business competitiveness, the economic strength of their operating environments, and their commitment to inclusion and diversity demand that they stay the course. There's no citation that says that that's anything that anybody studied. So let me finish telling you what Moeller says. By ending this way, the article shows its true colors. Shortall does not merely offer management advice or offer dispassionate analysis of corporate America. She's moved into advocacy. She sings the song of the moral revolution and summons American businesses to join in the tune. We ought to expect her advocacy for LGBTQ agenda, given that Shortall led the Texas Competes Coalition, which has argued for LGBTQ inclusion in Texas since 2015. Now, let's go back to, now we know the second driver, let's go back to the media. Even in media, and if you just read a newspaper today, you can pick out exactly where that reporter wants to go. That's called advocacy journalism. Let me hit two more. Can you guys stay for a couple more minutes to, okay?
Yep, I agree.
Well, you want to come back? Well, actually, I'll give you the rest of this tomorrow. Does that work?
Tuesday?
I'm sorry, Tuesday. Tuesday,
Yeah.
because I'm going to
Sorry,
do.
I've got an interview.
I'm going to do the drivers Tuesday at Masters, man, because I think it's important.
One other thing too is.
Yeah, because I want to hear what else you have to say.
What are the athletes fall in? Because they have such an influence on kids.
Probably so.
So whether the, I don't know the four categories.
They don't. He doesn't list them here. And again, you can probably take some kind of. You can probably find people will say there are a number of different drivers. This is his take on it. So let's do stop for today, and we'll come back. We'll get part of this on Tuesday. I'll have to finish up the rest of us that won't be at Tuesday's meeting on Wednesday. We'll finish up the final two. And then we'll talk about who the enemy is and where the authority comes from. So let's finish today. Tony, why don't you do a closing prayer for us?
Father,